For decades, Lucille Ball made the world laugh louder than anyone else. But near the end of her life, the sound of laughter faded, replaced by silence, regret, and a single moment that revealed everything she had spent years hiding. When she sat down for what would become her final interview, the fiery redhead audiences adored was gone. In her place was an aging woman carrying the weight of a lifetime success, heartbreak, and the painful feeling of being left behind by the very world she helped build. What she said that day left everyone in the room, and millions watching at home, in tears. Still the queen of comedy, but now, quietly, undeniably lonely. By 1989, Lucille Ball's name was still legendary, but her life no longer felt that way. The woman who once commanded 44 million viewers every Monday night now lived in a quiet, echoing mansion in Beverly Hills. The house that had once overflowed with laughter and famous guests had grown cold. Most of her friends had died off. Her children, Lucy and Desi Jr., lived far away and were rarely seen. And though her second husband, Gary Morton, still kept her company, he spoke often about the heaviness in the air, sadness no amount of fame or fortune seemed able to lift. Lucille had once been America's sweetheart, but behind closed doors she was haunted by memories she couldn't outrun. The failure of life with Lucy in 1986 had shattered her spirit. She had come out of retirement, hoping to remind the world that she still had her magic. Instead, the show was canceled after only 8 episodes. Critics called it a painful farewell. Friends said Lucy took it personally, that she stayed up late rereading reviews, wondering if she had finally been forgotten. The disappointment wasn't about the show. It felt like a cruel message that time had passed and Hollywood no longer had room for its queen. The comedians she once inspired now ruled television, but few called to check on her. The woman who'd opened the doors for generations of female performers was alone in her living room, running I Love Lucy reruns. Sometimes she laughed softly at her younger self, only to wipe away a tear moments later. And physically, she was fading too. Years of smoking had ravaged her lungs, and by 1988 her heart began to fail. But even now she refused to show weakness. "I'm fine," she'd insist, even when she could barely make it to the kitchen. When friends urged her to slow down, she'd say, "I don't know how to stop." That stubbornness had made her a star, and now it was all she had left. Lucille Desiree Ball was born on August 6, 1911, in Jamestown, New York, a girl from a small town who one day would shake the world of entertainment. Her childhood was anything but merry, however. When she was 3 years old, her father, Henry Ball, fell seriously ill with typhoid fever. He continued climbing telephone poles through snowstorms until his last weeks of life, attempting to untangle wires. His health suddenly collapsed, and on February 28, 1915, he died when he was only 27 years old. Lucy remembered that day, her mother's tears, the picture falling off the wall, and a little bird stuck inside the house. That picture terrified her and brought on a lifelong fear of birds. Real ones, pictures of them, even patterns on the wallpaper. When her father died, her young mother, Dee Dee, was overwhelmed and pregnant, sending Lucy to live with relatives while trying to piece their lives together. Lucy grew up feeling displaced, just a guest in her own family. When her mother remarried, life didn't get any easier. Her stepfather's parents were cold, strict people who forbade the use of mirrors in the house so that children wouldn't become vain. Lucy would say later those years taught her how to act, how to pretend things were just fine when they weren't. Then came another tragedy. When Lucy was 12, her stepfather set up a target practice area in the backyard. One day, a terrible accident occurred. A young neighbor boy was shot and paralyzed. The boy's family sued and won everything. The Balls lost their home, their furniture, even their insurance. Lucy's grandfather, consumed by guilt, never worked again. "One accident destroyed us," she would say. By her late 20s, Lucille Ball had already endured more heartbreak than most people experience in a lifetime. She moved to New York to pursue acting, only to be told she had no talent. A teacher even sent her home, advising her mother not to waste money. "All I learned there," Lucy later said, "was how to be frightened." But she refused to give up. She took modeling jobs, moved to Hollywood, and slowly worked her way into films. By the 1930s, she had appeared in more than 75 movies, usually in small roles. Still, each set became a classroom teaching her timing, presence, and confidence in front of the camera. Her life changed in 1940 when she met a young Cuban musician named Desi Arnaz during the filming of Too Many Girls. They fell quickly, passionately, and chaotically in love. Desi was charming but unpredictable, drinking, staying out late, and flirting constantly. Lucy, who had always craved stability, found herself in emotional turmoil. Yet she loved him deeply and believed they could save each other if they worked together. That belief eventually gave birth to I Love Lucy. In 1951, when CBS came to Lucy with a deal to turn her popular radio show into a TV series, she insisted on Desi playing her on-screen husband. But execs opposed the idea, insisting America would never cotton to an interracial couple. Lucy refused to compromise. She and Desi took the experiment on the road with a live stage tour to prove the network wrong. Fans adored them, and CBS eventually caved. I Love Lucy became a national mania. At its height, it outdrew the president's speech. Lucy's physical comedy, fearlessness, and timing made her an icon. But behind the curtain, her marriage continued to crumble under the weight of Desi's infidelity. It was always the same booze and broads, she once said. When the show ended in 1957, their marriage followed. Then came one of the darkest chapters of her life, the Red Scare. In the early 1950s, fear of communism swept across America. Careers were destroyed overnight. In 1953, gossip columnist Walter Winchell hinted that a famous red-haired actress had ties to the Communist Party. Everyone knew he meant Lucille Ball. Headlines exploded. The accusation came from something she had done nearly 20 years earlier. She had registered to vote as a communist solely to please her socialist-leaning grandfather. She never attended meetings or supported the ideology, but in the hysteria of the Cold War, the truth didn't matter. With millions of dollars on the line and I Love Lucy currently in production, the scandal seemed to threaten everything she and Desi had worked for. Lucy confronted investigators head-on, calmly explaining the situation before coolly stating, "I have never been a communist. I have never been involved in anything subversive in my life." Desi was quick to defend her, and during one live performance, he famously shot back, "The only thing red about Lucy is her hair, and even that's not legitimate." The crowd erupted into applause. But behind the cheers of fans and the glow of fame, Lucille Ball's private life was quietly unraveling. When I Love Lucy finally ended in 1957, she was still the most powerful woman in television. She and Desi Arnaz owned Desilu Productions, the studio that would later create classics like Star Trek and Mission Impossible. Yet the success that had once held their marriage together was now tearing it apart. Their arguments became loud, cruel, and constant. "We weren't fighting for love anymore," Lucille once said. "We were fighting to survive." On March 3, 1960, just one day after Desi's birthday and the filming of their final episode together, Lucille filed for divorce. 2 months later, their 20-year marriage officially ended. The world was stunned. To millions, they were still Lucy and Ricky, the lovable couple who made America believe in laughter. But behind the scenes, Lucille had weathered years of betrayal, drinking, and emotional turmoil. Desi later said, "I caused it. My drinking, my temper. I ruined the best thing that ever happened to me." Even apart, their lives continued to be connected through business and love. Lucy bought out Desi's shares of Desilu for $2.5 million, becoming the first woman in Hollywood history to run a major studio. But while she attained unparalleled power, she did not find peace. In 1961, she married comedian Gary Morton, a kind, patient man 13 years her junior. Their marriage endured until her death, but Lucy often confessed that though Gary brought stability, Desi had given her passion. "Gary gave me stability," she said, "but Desi gave me fire." Her children, Lucy and Desi Jr., grew up under the enormous pressure of their family's fame. While Lucy followed in her mother's footsteps, Desi Jr. struggled with addiction and scandal. In the early 1970s, his relationship with actress Patty Duke became a tabloid frenzy. When Duke became pregnant, rumors swirled that Desi Jr. was the father. Lucille was crushed. She saw it as a public humiliation, staining the family name. Though a DNA test years later proved Desi Jr. was not the father, the emotional damage had already taken root. Lucy withdrew further, burying herself in work while privately trying to hold the family together. Then tragedy struck again. Vivian Vance, her co-star, confidant, and best friend, was diagnosed with cancer. Lucille stayed by her side until the end. When Vivian died in 1979, Lucille was devastated. "Part of me died with her," she told her close friend Carol Burnett. The call that came in November 1986 was the one Lucille had always dreaded. Desi Arnaz was dying. Lung cancer had taken its toll on him, and he only had weeks to live. Despite the divorce and all the years thereafter, Lucille never stopped caring about him. She called often, sent letters, and eventually flew to Del Mar to see him one last time. Their daughter, Lucy, would later describe these moments as tender. They were filled with tears, laughter, and forgiveness. It was November 30th, their anniversary, when Lucille called again. Lucy held the phone to her father's ear and said, "Say what you want to say." All Lucille could whisper were the 3 words that had always bound them together. "I love you." She said them over and over. Desi, weak but conscious, whispered back, "I love you too, honey. Good luck with your show." 2 days later, Desi Arnaz died at 69. The date was December 2nd, 1986. To Lucille, it seemed as though the last bright light in her world had been extinguished. Just 5 days after his death, she attended the Kennedy Center Honors in Washington, D.C. She hadn't wanted to go, but her family convinced her. Halfway through the ceremony, actor Robert Stack walked onto the stage holding a letter, one Desi had written shortly before his death. He had known she would be honored that week. The New York Times once asked me to apportion credit for "I Love Lucy" among the writers, the directors, and the cast. I said, "Give Lucy 90% of the credit and divide the remaining 10% among the rest of us." Lucy was the show. Viv, Fred, and I were just props. Damn good props, but props nevertheless. "I Love Lucy" was never just a title. As the words echoed through the theater, the cameras cut to Lucille. Her hands shook. Tears filled her eyes. Gary Morton, holding her hand tightly, watched as she broke down. President Ronald Reagan and First Lady Nancy Reagan looked on solemnly. For the first time in public, Lucille Ball, America's Queen of Comedy, cried openly, and everyone in the theater wept with her. It was the perfect final tribute. Desi's last love letter to the woman who had been his partner in art, chaos, and history. Several years later, Lucille gave her last television interview in 1989. She was thinner now, her voice softer, but her wit still sharp. When asked what she hoped to be remembered for, she paused and quietly said, "For making people happy." After a moment, she added with a small smile, "That's all I ever wanted." The room became silent. It was a simple statement, but it conveyed what she had lived, lost, and given. Months later, she suffered a heart attack and underwent surgery. For a brief moment, it seemed she might recover. But on April 26, 1989, Lucille Ball's heart gave out. She died at 77. Lucille Ball's story reminds us that even the brightest stars carry shadows behind their light. Do you think the world ever gave her the recognition she truly deserved? Let us know in the comments. And if you still love Lucy as much as we do, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more untold Hollywood stories.